Early this morning, President Obama announced the apparently forced resignation of Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel amidst reports that many in his administration thought that he could no longer deal with the threats internationally that are now facing the United States. We've got President Obama. We will also have comments from Chuck Hagel and then some interesting insider insight into exactly why Chuck Hagel is going to be replaced. But first, Barack Obama.
Now, last month, Chuck came to me to discuss the final quarter of my presidency and determined that, having guided the department through this transition, it was an appropriate time for him to complete his service. There's one thing I know about Chuck, it's that he does not make this or any decision lightly. This decision does not come easily to him, but I consider myself extraordinarily lucky to have had him by my side for 2 years, and I am grateful that Chuck has agreed to stay on until I nominate his successor, and that successor is confirmed by the Senate.
Not looking very happy there. So that was President Obama.
Hagel never looks happy.
No, he's not a particularly happy guy. But why don't we actually hear directly from at least the current Secretary of Defense?
And as the President noted, I have today submitted my resignation as Secretary of Defense. It's been the greatest privilege of my life, the greatest privilege of my life to lead, and most important, to serve with the men and women of the Defense Department and support their families. I am immensely proud of what we've accomplished during this time. We have prepared ourselves, as the President has noted, and Afghan National Security Forces for a successful transition in Afghanistan.
Those remarks, obviously, there was much more to it. Feel free to look that up. But yeah, it seems like apparently he was brought in for a particular set of skills. I would assume not all having to do with his ability to deal with international threats. It was partially a bipartisan gesture and all that. He is a man who's fairly widely respected, but the world is very different than it was when he was initially brought in to be the defense secretary, and it looks like they're going to have to go in a different direction.
Both sides are spinning it. You're hearing from, and so in this case, it's hard to know, although what's clear is that there were significant rifts in the administration involving Chuck Hagel. The White House there's an anonymous source at the White House who says Hagel simply wasn't up to the job. Yeah. And it looks like I'm standing next to Chuck Hagel. If Chuck Hagel had a huge head. They're saying he's not up to the job, and then there's some Hagel people who were suggesting that, there's a CNN piece out now that he never really had a chance. And there's sort of two lines of thought here, and the first one is that he clashed with the president's national security team, and after the changes were made in that national security team, there wasn't as much structure and discipline. Hagel's people were saying Hagel didn't react well to the structure and the lack of structure and discipline, and that the Obama team and the stuff you hear all the time when top-level cabinet officials meet, that there was a fight and a battle over how much time who would get with the president, and he felt left out. And maybe even his supporters are saying he didn't quite know how to handle that. He wasn't good at solving that problem, at dealing with that game. It's not really a game, but that's the term.
It's a bureaucratic game, I suppose.
Right. So, but there were clearly some tensions, it seems, not clearly, but from Hagel's people say that there were tensions between Hagel and Susan Rice. And I believe that part of it because he's gone. That would suggest that there were tensions between them, and he wasn't there that long. But what is alarming to me, and the most important thing I think we ought to be discussing when it gets down to who's going to replace him, because one of those schools of thought about Hagel was that the Obama people and that national security team that ultimately is led by Susan Rice, that Hagel was the least emotional person there, and that forget whether some people are saying, oh, he's detached and wouldn't participate in cabinet meetings. Like, I don't, that all seems like bullshit, right? But if it's true that this is the guy who said, I know we just saw a video of an American getting their head cut off, but we don't want to change our policy based on that without soberly thinking about that. If that guy lost the battle inside the political battle inside the White House, then that's a shame. Yeah. If that's the case. So
foreign policy was run on the opposite of that for 10 years.
I think we'll find out a little bit about whether that was the case by who's nominated to replace him.
I think that's exactly why he's kicked out. So we all recall Chuck Hagel during the Bush years. He's the one who often said reasonable things, that we said, hey, there's one Republican who's not insane. Unfortunately, he then went on to vote with the Republicans almost all the time. But that, to me, is Chuck Hagel's downfall. is that he is not able to kind of capitalize on the emotion of the moment and run with hysterics and try to rally people on his side. He wasn't that guy. And as a Republican in an otherwise Democratic cabinet, he didn't reach out and get rally people to his side and make friends. And that's not his strong suit. But I don't want that to be the strong suit in a defense secretary. I want the defense secretary to make smart, wise decisions.
Yeah, so that's right. That's the main thing. Is that is he, will his replacement be a voice in the president's ear about, deep breaths, Barry. There's a quote here from Steve Clemens. He's the Atlantic editor-at-large, founder of the New American Foundation, Foundation's America Strategy.
Fit America in there a few times.
Yeah, you know what? You should put America in the title, and then people will know that you're patriotic. So anyway, but he's a serious guy and is a Hagel supporter, and he threw a couple of bones to the fact that Hagel wasn't good at playing politics. Also, an acknowledgement on nearly all of these articles that Hagel wasn't good in front of the cameras. And that as Obama's taken hits on national security issue after national security issue, probably unfairly, probably because those hits are the result of a world that the president can't keep from exploding all over the place, but that you want a face of sort of steely competence, and Hagel didn't provide that for whatever reason. But
or
Steve Clemens,
arrogance, like Rumsfeld.
That's exactly right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let me just read this quote real quick and then jump. So Steve Clemens says, there was a tightness to the process of talking to the president and getting the national security message out. There was a tightness to that process that degraded significantly, Steve Clemens said. I think there was tension between Hagel and Susan Rice and tension over what was appropriate conduct in terms of managing cabinet strategies and their time with Obama.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate, but we do want, as Americans, leaders who have some swagger, even if it's unjustified, like Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld will come out and say on television the most ridiculous things. And he would say it with a lot of confidence. Even when he says things like, yeah, we know exactly where the weapons of mass destruction are. They're in the areas north, south, east, and west of Tikrit. How absurd is that comment? But he says it with swagger and with utter confidence. And people seem to like it. Hagel wasn't that guy. He's more pensive and more
Let me read this.
deliberate.
This is the more appropriate Steve Clemens quote. Obama himself has not been able to articulate and stick to a strategically coherent plan, says Steve Clemens. His administration has become overly reactive to problems, not strategic. Hagel is a strategic guy. The change will really make permanent the notion that Obama not only did not dismantle the national security state inferred that Bush established, he doubled down on it in the end, and Obama didn't have the courage of his convictions in a way to go a Hagel route. Now, that's a Hagel supporter.
Yeah, exactly.
But it does suggest, again, that there's a strategy guy, and strategy isn't swagger.
That's right.
Strategy is, you know what, we got to sit down over the weekend, we got to talk about this and make sure we stick to our,
I feel like it's not necessarily a particularly accurate description of what Obama has tried, at least seemingly, to accomplish in his time. I mean, I think that if it seems like he lacks some overarching foreign policy objective, it's only because he doesn't have some of what many would see as the ulterior motives of the Bush administration, that they had something that they wanted out of the Middle East that they went to try to get. They weren't able to get it, and it was a gigantic mess. Whereas I think Obama is doing largely, he is consistent in that he's trying to not get us involved in too significant a fashion anywhere that he can. He's not drawing down the forces like we might have wanted, and certainly not at the speed that we would have wanted, but he's helping to avoid any massive increases in number of troops in Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria. I mean, that is a consistent position, even if it's not one that Chuck Hagel or Steve Clemens
What's interesting is that we don't know exactly what Hagel's position is, or I don't know. Maybe you guys know, maybe the world knows, but you read two different, what's great, do we have video of them hugging? Was that included? So they hugged today, Hagel and Obama. And then within 10 minutes of them hugging, a White House official says Chuck Hagel wasn't up to the job and he didn't handle himself well in cabinet meetings and he was just the wrong pick. And
He's a bad hugger.
Right. And then people like Steve Clemens and Hagel's people are coming out and saying Hagel was a sober, strategic guy, and the rest of them are like, do something! Right? And so what happens now? Like, are they going to meet again tomorrow and be like, okay, so 10 minutes after we had this nice meeting,
it's a lame duck situation. I mean,
I totally believe that, though. I totally believe that Chuck Hagel is the kind of guy who sits there, is like, okay, he's watching an American get his head beheaded, head cut off, and he's calm about it. And I agree with you. He's the kind of guy who would sit there and say, well, we should have a 12-point plan on how to prevent this from happening in the future. What should we do? And we could, have a long game. And that's not what the presidency is about anymore. I think the presidency is now about marketing and PR and looking and saying the right things in front of the camera. You have to have a certain amount of swagger and anger, and you have to have quick action that shows the world, no, we've got revenge. And
but that's not really Obama either. And Obama doesn't seem like a particularly emotionally reactionary guy.
But I think he's being pushed in that direction. I mean, everything he's done has been to not upset the status quo, right? So everything. So he's been following kind of like the Bush doctrine all along. There hasn't been any massive shift. The Iraq drawdown, that was a plan agreed to by Bush that he executed. And I guess in Afghanistan he changed the policy there, but not really.
But if ISIS had risen to power in the way that it did under Obama, under Bush instead, don't you think that Bush would have used that as an opportunity to send another 50 to 100,000 troops? I mean, I feel like
not at the end. There was no political will to do it at the end. I mean, there was early on. There isn't a political will to do it now. And so what's interesting is that while you see these guys hugging, to me is like, what did Chuck Hagel want? Because there's a couple of these articles suggest that Hagel had frustration with that Obama wouldn't put boots on the ground. But then the same articles suggest that Chuck Hagel was the sober, strategic one who would ease caution in those situations. But maybe the sober, strategic thought was, you have to put boots on the ground. So, but I'm curious. I love that we live in a world where these guys hug each other and says it's mutual agreement, and within seconds, there are stories from both sides, like he was an incompetent boob, and the other one's like, oh, he got froze out by these over-emotional maniacs. Although it's worth noting that the Hagel people used the emotion part, and the person who Hagel clashed with was a woman. Like that I suspect is not an accident
that's
either.
certainly not a bad point. Look, the scariest thing for me would be for us to return to a foreign policy of like the alert level. That just every day, if there's a rumor from Syria, it goes up to red and then back down to orange. Then back, I don't want to return to a foreign policy like that. I have a feeling that Obama will not go in that direction.